working in organizations, it's easier and cheaper than ever to go and talk to a customer or talk to a bunch of people to figure out a bit more what's going on, and to produce solutions that can be variants that don't just take the first three, but maybe the next five possible explanations into account as well, and consider that when producing solutions for a problem, right?
Yeah.
So somewhat we seem to have evolved on that. At the same time, organizations and leadership seems to be caught up with, no, it's only those vertical things, it's only those biggest numbers, and everything else we don't consider. And for me as a designer, it's interesting because as a designer, it was always interesting to get closer to academia and science. And it seems to always be of a jarring way, we would talk about it, where scientists are very accurate and sit within particular boxes and are very aware of what they can and cannot measure, whereas designers always seem to be going quite beyond that quite easily and more confidently,
Yeah.
because they're
Yeah.
considered more emotional aspects of it, which are really, really hard to measure,
Yeah. I think
if not at all.
yeah.
But they're more familiar with the complexity.
Yeah, I think that notion of familiar with the complexity is important. It's a bit like until you begin to read into a topic, you know everything about it. And I can remember in the VSI book that you're talking about, very early on, before I even began to read about leadership, I practiced it in my previous lives, and I thought I knew quite a lot about it. And then when I began to read, I realized I knew basically nothing about leadership. And now I think I know even less about leadership because there's so much out there, and you don't realize what it is that you don't know. It's the kind of Socrates and his arguments about ignorance is about you don't really realize until you look into something just how ignorant you are. So there is something in there about recognizing your own fallibility and your own desire for certainty, which means quite often what we tend to do when we're looking at these kinds of problems is search for an instant solution. And that saves a lot of anxiety, even though in reality, that the problem is we should be looking at the question rather longer than we're looking at the answer. But we are trained and rewarded to give instant answers, a bit like a kind of business consultancy. It's hard to go and sell your services when you go and say to a corporation, so this problem you've got, I'm not sure there's a solution to it. Right? In which case, they'll find somebody that has a solution to it. And it's the equivalent of, if your football team is struggling, what you do is you get rid of the football manager, and then when you do interviews, you ask the manager, "Can you get us back into the top division within the season?" And if they say no, then you find somebody who says yes. Now, whether they actually do it or not, secondary to the confidence that they generate with the answer, as opposed to, well, there's a lot of complex variables involved in getting your team back into the top division. I don't want to hear about complex variables. I want to hear somebody who's confident about, a world-beating test and track system. I don't want to hear somebody say, this is really complicated and I'm not sure about that. And that is an issue that stymies a lot of leaders, that we know that people are attracted to leaders who appear to be confident about everything. Whether they're,
I think that's
whether they are
I think
or not, it's, that's what people seem to want.